Hello and welcome back to my channel. This is the Royal Book Review where I talk about books about royals, history, that kind of thing. In today's video I'm going to be talking about the first 3 chapters in Spare and the first chapter in Tina Brown's The Diana Chronicles. So just a little disclaimer, these are just my opinions but they are based on a lot of research. I have read Spare 3 times now and I've done a lot of close text analysis of this book. It's just my opinion, but I'm going to justify why I've come to the conclusions that I have. Also, to toot my own horn, I do have a degree in English literature and I have masters in creative writing, so my opinions have been carefully considered. But I do encourage everyone to do their own research and come to your own conclusions. Also, I'm going to make a playlist of each book because I'm not going to just discuss Spare all the way through because that would be boring if I just only discuss one book at a time. And obviously it's going to take me quite a while to get through the whole book, so I am going to do videos on other books as well, so they're not always going to be the same one. Again, as usual, I'm going to timestamp which chapter and which book I'm going to be talking about, so you can just skip along if you want to go to that bit. So I already discussed the introduction, the prologue to Spare in a previous video, and I go over some of the context that have been left out. So chapter 1 of Spare, the story begins in August 1997, so it's very interesting how this is the beginning of his story. Of course it's a very important, pivotal moment in his life, but he's not exactly a small child at this point. He's 12 turning 13, so he's already had basically his entire childhood, and that's just completely disregarded. We're not allowed to know anything about the Harry beforehand. So there's no groundwork in building of his childhood, there's no sense of who he was before this point in time. He doesn't really go into it at all, even later on in the book. It's as if this childhood Harry did not exist. So obviously it's summer 1997 and the royals, they tend to go to Scotland for a couple of weeks in the summer, obviously staying at Balmoral Castle, and the narration is very inconsistent. There's all these elaborate descriptions of the surroundings and the castle, the buildings and things like that, but they're not exactly from his point of view and what he feels about them. They're more of just an info dump. And then to contrast that, he'll add these vague little details which have obviously been very cherry picked, and there's just no reason for it after he's just gone through all of these elaborate descriptions of the castle to then start getting vague. People would whisper now and then about folks who hadn't fared well at Balmoral. The long ago queen, for instance, mad with grief, she locked herself inside Balmoral Castle and vowed never to come out. So that's obviously Queen Victoria he's talking about. So again, I don't really understand the creative choice there to not say that it's Queen Victoria, even though we know it obviously is her, because who else could it be? He also immediately shows that he is an unreliable narrator, and I mentioned this in a previous video, but there is a difference between an autobiography and a memoir. Basically, in a memoir you can say whatever you want because it's very stream of consciousness, opinion driven. There's no quotations, there's no referencing, anything like that. There is no threshold for facts in a memoir. So I suppose it's his way of being able to rewrite his life the way he wants to remember it. So rather than establishing a certain level of facts or the parameters of what we know this happened but this is how I felt about this situation, he opts to make the reader doubt his narration, yet at the same time he expects you to take it at face value and take this as the truth. Still, I don't think I heard those stories until much later, or maybe I heard them and they didn't register. So his narration is also quite superficial. He slips from stream of consciousness to recounting things from his childhood as if he knows exactly what happened, to then speculating about things that might have happened. The whole family, with the exception of Mummy, because Mummy was no longer part of the family, she'd either bolted or been thrown out, depending on whom you asked. Though I never asked anyone. Either way, she was having her own holiday elsewhere. Greece, someone said. No, Sardinia, someone said. No, someone chimed in. Your mother's in Paris. Maybe it was Mummy herself who said that, when she phoned earlier that day for a chat. So it's all very speculative, but I think there's something that I noticed in this particular passage where he says, though I never asked anyone, and I think that's a very important detail because that is a theme throughout the entire book. He never actually finds out information about things, and he's formed these very emotionally based opinions on stuff when he's never actually gone to ask anyone. I think that's a very important thing that I've noticed, because a lot of his criticism of other people is there apparent in his point of view, lack of communication skills with him. He's never gone to someone and asked them or tried to understand something from their point of view. Immediately we're given a defence of the inconsistencies which are bound to be picked up by fact checkers. Obviously there's already been a couple of instances in the press where they've noticed some things that are basically not true and he's just written it as though it happened that way when it couldn't have. It's not about feelings, it's also a matter of you literally weren't there at that time. So that didn't happen, did it? So he claims to not have access to his childhood memories because of a trauma response. Alas, the memory lies with a million others on the other side of the high mental wall. Such a horrid, tantalising feeling to know they're over there, just on the other side, mere inches away, but the wall is always too high, too thick, unscalable. So again, there's no distinction between the fact that most people don't recall every single detail of their childhood and things that you've suppressed because of a trauma response. It's perfectly normal to not remember every single birthday cake you got for every single birthday, or every present you received, or every time you played with someone, or every childhood friend. That's perfectly normal. There is a wealth of psychological research on memory to support that. But for someone like Harry, who's had their childhood meticulously archived, not just in the press, within his own family as well, it just undermines the validity of his text, that a lot of the details he's getting wrong. It's like you could have literally just looked this up on the internet, especially when it's a really silly, not mistake, because he's intentionally written something as though he had an emotional experience about it. And another issue is that he seems incapable of distinguishing how he feels personally and what actually happened. So he blurs the line about his opinion and then just blatantly making things up. And it's a lot of the time things that can be researched and that are in the public domain. So one of the critical questions we need to ask ourselves is, what are the motivations of the writer and why are they choosing to present information in this way? And then more importantly, why is he choosing to leave some details out? And this is something that I considered when, especially in the first chapter, when he describes encountering Dodi al-Fayed. So he notes how people in the royal circle referred to him as Diana's friend, and he notes not boyfriend, not lover, mummy's friend. So he's inferring that Diana's relationship with Dodi was not condoned within royal circles. Does he actually know that, or is he just assuming that? Has he actually asked anyone what they thought? Because even at the time there were a lot of press reports that Charles was very happy for Diana to move on, and he was very encouraging of that, because then it would probably give him a little bit of a break, because he was still getting a lot of bad press from the fact that they divorced in the first place. He got a lot of the blame for that. So again, what are the motivations of Harry, who doesn't actually know what happened? He doesn't ask anyone these things, yet he's assuming things and then trying to take a position as someone of authority who knows what happened to then relay the information. And that's why I'm going to talk about Tina Brown's Diana Chronicles, because she actually researched a lot of Diana's life and spoke to a lot of people who knew her a bit more than her 12-year-old son. So about Dodi, Harry says, "Nice enough bloke, I thought. Willie and I had just met him. Actually, we'd been with Mummy weeks earlier when she first met him, in Saint-Tropez. We were having a grand time, just the three of us, staying at some old gent's villa. There was much laughter, horseplay, the norm whenever Mummy and Willie and I were together, though even more so on that holiday. Everything about that trip to Saint-Tropez was heaven. The weather was sublime, the food was tasty, Mummy was smiling." And then he talks about him and William playing on jet skis and getting into trouble and almost injuring themselves. Was it after we got back from the jet ski misadventure that Mummy's friend first appeared? No, more likely it was just before. Hello there, you must be Harry. Raven hair, leathery tan, bone white smile. How are you today? My name is blah blah. He chatted us up, chatted Mummy up, specifically Mummy, pointedly Mummy, his eyes plumbing into red hearts. So then we're supposed to take this as this is his interpretation of what happened at that time, how his very superficial investment almost in what was happening, but he noticed that a man was flirting with his mum basically. He was cheeky, no doubt, but again, nice enough. He gave Mummy a present, diamond bracelet. She seemed to like it. She wore it a lot. Then he faded from my consciousness. As long as Mummy's happy, I told Willie, who said he felt the same. So the chapter 1 ends there, and the chapters are very, very short. He does cut the chapter short very quickly, and you'd never really get to immerse yourself in any particular scene or any particular event. It's just ended quite quickly. So we go on to chapter 2, and he's at Balmoral at this point, and he talks about the shock of being from sunny Saint-Tropez and then going to cloud-shadowed Balmoral. I vaguely remember that shock, though I can't remember much else about our first week at the castle. Still, I can almost guarantee it was spent mostly outdoors. My family lived to be outdoors, especially Granny, who got cross if she didn't breathe at least an hour of fresh air each day. What we did outdoors, however, what we said, wore, ate, I can't conjure. Another aspect of his narration is that he sometimes references what was in the press at the time about them. So in this instance he says, "There's some reports that we journeyed by the Royal Yacht from the Isle of Wight to the castle, the yacht's final voyage. Sounds lovely." So the Royal Yacht Britannia was decommissioned officially in November 1997, and the royal family did go on a cruise in the summer, but it wasn't its final journey. And how he ends that with "sounds lovely," as though he doesn't remember it, and it's just like, this is what people have said have happened. Something that he does a lot, he's very passive aggressive in his narration, and he's very indirect. Even in his own book, where he has his own space to talk about things, he can't directly say anything or say how he feels. It's just very passive aggressive, and it's quite immature to realise that a man who is almost 40 years old, he can't stop with the little snide comments. And it's something about something so unprovocative as just like newspapers reporting about the royal family going on a cruise around the British Isles. Sounds lovely. It's just very odd to be so passive aggressive about something that's not provocative at all. So after he's attempted to try and gain some sympathy by saying he can't remember much of his childhood because of trauma, he now wants to claim back some reliability. What I do retain in crisp detail is the physical setting. So even though he can't remember a lot, he remembers every place he's been. Dates, sorry, I'll need to look them up. Dialogue, I'll try my best, but make no verbatim claims, especially when it comes to the 90s. But ask me about any space I've occupied: castle, cockpit, classroom, stateroom, bedroom, palace, garden, pub, and I'll recreate it down to the carpet tacks. And this is the issue, that's what he does do. He does make verbatim claims. He makes direct claims not only about what people say, but then what their intentions must have been. And it's based solely on his emotional response to what happened. And because of that, there's just no reflection. Most people have the basic ability to empathise with other people, to reflect upon what might have been their intentions. And just because you feel a certain way, again, offence is taken, not given. He does make verbatim claims about a lot of these things that have happened. So he claims to have a unique memory. Why should my memory organise experience like this? Is it genetics, trauma, some Frankenstein-esque combination of the two? Is it my inner soldier assessing every space as a potential battlefield? My innate homebody nature rebelling against a forced nomadic existence? Is it some base apprehension that the world is essentially a maze and you should never be caught in a maze without a map? So he wants to find a greater meaning for his experience. And again, the truth is most people can't recall every detail of their childhood. You would have to go back and talk to your family about things that have happened, your photo albums out, and have a look and be like, oh, I remember that now, and oh, do you remember this? And it's like, no, but you've got a picture of it. Some memories just aren't stored that way, and that's not because you're special and you have a unique memory and you have a unique ability to remember things and store things a certain way. It's just, that's very normal to not remember every single thing about your childhood. But again, we're not all like Harry. We're not all in a position where our experiences have been meticulously archived and documented, not just in the press. So now we get to his big argument. Whatever the cause, my memory is my memory. It does what it does, gathers and curates as it sees fit, and there's just as much truth in what I remember and how I remember it as there is in so-called objective facts. The issue is, feelings are not facts. And that's something that I'm going to point out as we come to those passages, because Harry truly believes if he felt something, then that's because people in that situation made him feel like that, because they were trying to make him feel like that. That's the general process that it seems to happen. But he's justifying his version of reality that he's writing in this book as the truth. And there are a lot of very good examples as we go through of how his feelings and his truth just simply don't hold up to the objective reality that the rest of us inhibit. It's especially interesting when his own narration decides to contradict his own assertions. So again, he goes on still describing Balmoral in detail. He talks about the Queen and her corgis, and to be honest, it's the image of the Queen that I think most of us have always had. There's no sense of his personal feelings about a lot of these people. They're almost one-dimensional concepts of these people. So again, he talks about Queen Victoria again. I found the Grandmama of Europe hugely compelling, and not just because Granny loved her, nor because Pa wanted to name it after her husband. Mummy blocked him. During her long lonely reign, she was shot at 8 times, on 8 separate occasions, by 7 different subjects. Not one bullet hit the mark. Nothing could bring Victoria down. Later on in the book, he feels very strongly about his apparent aversion to royal history, and yet he seems to have quite a lot of knowledge about royal history. So now we get onto some more interesting details, and I think I do like reading people's first-hand accounts, because as much as they want to control what they're telling us and they feel like they're presenting things in a space where they can control it, there's a lot of unconscious things that you can tell about someone. Even if someone's writing about a fiction book, you can tell a lot about their views and how they view the world just based on how they write characters and dialogue, the way the stories go for them. So I do find that quite interesting, and even more so in something like this. Balmoral had 50 bedrooms, one of which had been divided for me and Willie. Adults called it the nursery. Willie had the larger half, with a double bed, a good-sized basin, a cupboard with mirrored doors, a beautiful window looking down on the courtyard, the fountain, the bronze statue of a roe-deered buck. My half of the room was far smaller, less luxurious. So William had a larger half of a room. They're still in the same bedroom. They're in the same room. So he notices the quality and the luxury of things when compared to things that his brother has got. I'm no interior decorator, but wouldn't you organise a room to have consistent furniture? That's kind of the goal, to have a certain aesthetic look. So why would you have one half of the room with like just the best quality furniture, these gorgeous antiques, and then the other half just kitted out with some IKEA stuff? Why would you do that? Why would you intentionally make one half of a room look better than the other if it's for people to share? Or perhaps is this how Harry views the world? Because William has something, it automatically means it must be better. So then about having the less luxurious half of a bedroom that they share. I never asked why, I didn't care, but I also didn't need to ask. 2 years older than me, Willie was the heir, whereas I was the spare. This wasn't merely how the press referred to us, but it was definitely that. This was shorthand often used by Pa, Mummy and Grandpa, and even Granny. So this is the beginning of Harry trying to persuade the reader that he doesn't care about being the spare or the status in general. He says, I never asked why. He's never talked about these issues with hierarchy that he definitely has with anyone. He didn't need to ask. He didn't need to ask because his mind has already arranged everything William gets and everything that he perceives that he doesn't get as some kind of privilege because he's the heir and he's just the spare. He can't separate institution from family. And sometimes it's just because William's your older brother. It has nothing to do with the line of succession. Generally, older siblings get a bit more freedom than younger ones. You know, they get a later bedtime first. They can perhaps go out with their friends later. That's normal. His insistence that he doesn't care about it is just very unconvincing. I mean, the sheer fact that he's named his book Spare should tell you everything you need to know. The heir and the spare. There was no judgment about it, but also no ambiguity. I was the shadow, the support, the plan B. I was brought into the world in case something happened to Willie. Which is true, that is what the heir and the spare and the concept was, but historically it was because of mortality rates and the fact that most people didn't survive childhood. I mean, ask Henry VIII how difficult it was to get a son through childhood. I was summoned to provide backup, distraction, diversion, and if necessary a spare part. Kidney perhaps, blood transfusion, speck of bone marrow. So that is all just utter nonsense. What precedent has he got of any spare in history being needed to be an organ donor for an heir? There just isn't one. This is just how he feels. Why he feels this way, we don't know yet. And I suppose that's one of the mysteries that a lot of people don't seem to understand, and probably why he's had such a negative reaction to his existential crisis that he decided to play out very publicly. Comment about him being born just to be an organ donor for William is just, it's just nonsense. He then moves on to just blatant hypocrisy. He's made a lot of noise about disliking the press and feeling they've misrepresented him and that they've lied about him, and feels very strongly about this about himself. But clearly he doesn't care about misrepresenting other people or lying about them or spreading rumours or speculation or things that just simply aren't true. I was 20 the first time I heard the story of what Pa allegedly said to Mummy the day of my birth. Wonderful, now you give me an heir and a spare. My work is done. A joke, presumably. Again, he ends on a very passive aggressive, a joke presumably. But the whole point is that was allegedly. Who did he hear that from? Because to use his own mother's words against this statement that he's alleging that happened, these are Diana's own words. She said, Charles said, oh God, it's a boy and he's even got red hair. Nothing about him being elated at now he's got an heir and a spare and his work's done. That was apparently Charles's reaction to Harry being born. So again, he can't just say something directly. He's very passive aggressive about the whole thing. And in this instance, he's just very resentful about being the spare, and he's just, who can he be annoyed at about being born second? It's not going to be his mother, because he's never going to look at her as a well-rounded person. He's going to look at her through the weird, sainted press narrative version of her that exists. So naturally that leaves Charles to be the person whose fault everything is. He just has no issue writing this about his father, something that's alleged to have happened, but then he's going to repeat it and then spread it even more. And he does this throughout the whole book. He'll mention something that may have been reported or a rumour that he's heard about other people that's not particularly flattering. And yet he's repeating it in his book where his truth, you didn't remember this is something that you're repeating, that is a rumour, this isn't one of his memories. He didn't remember what Charles said when he was born because he was a baby, yet he's going to talk about things that he allegedly said. Obviously he has a lot of complicated feelings about his father. And then he goes on. On the other hand, minutes after delivering this bit of high comedy, Pa was said to have gone off to meet with his girlfriend. So, many a true word spoken in jest. So he said it was a joke, presumably, in his interpretation of something that probably never happened. Now he's claiming it was a bit of high comedy, so he's giving it almost a stamp of, yes, it's definitely happened. So what was that he said earlier about not making verbatim claims? So we have to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of him bringing up Charles's relationships that he doesn't know anything about? Remember, he doesn't ask anyone anything. He doesn't know this stuff. This is all stuff he's heard from other people. So this is obviously going to make Charles look bad. Why does Harry want Charles to look bad? I took no offence. I felt nothing about it, any of it. Succession was like the weather, or the position of the planets, or the turn of the seasons. Who had the time to worry about things so unchangeable? Who could bother with being bothered by a fate etched in stone? Being a Windsor meant working out which truths were timeless and then banishing them from your mind. It meant absorbing the basic parameters of one's identity, knowing by instinct who you were, which was forever a byproduct of who you weren't. So he's having an identity crisis, which I think is pretty obvious from what's been happening in the past few years. And the fact that he's named his book Spare, even though most people wouldn't consider Harry to be defined by being the Spare. And he notes that I wasn't Granny, I wasn't Pa, I wasn't Willie, I was third in line behind them. Every boy and girl at least once imagines themselves as a prince or princess. Therefore, spare or no spare, it wasn't half bad to actually be one. More, standing resolutely behind the people you loved. Wasn't that the definition of honour? I suppose the problem is Harry doesn't seem to be very happy to stand behind them at all. He resents it, and I think a lot of what he's written in his memoir shows that he hasn't productively confronted these feelings or made any steps with evidence-based therapeutic practices to resolve them either. Unlike Spares in the past, Harry has had more of an opportunity to have an identity outside of the royal bubble and be his own person. But he doesn't want that. He doesn't want to be his own person. He wants to be institutionally important. So even now in 2024, the office of Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, he craves the trimmings and the acknowledgement and the royal seal of approval for who he is as part of his identity. He craves the authority of being a royal. So on chapter 3 there are yet again more descriptions of Balmoral. I think I could draw a pretty good floor plan of the place at this point. On August the 30th, 1997, I didn't spend a lot of time looking at the lawn. Both Willie and I hurried through our evening baths, jumped into our pyjamas, settled eagerly in front of the TV. Footmen arrived carrying trays covered with plates, each topped with a silver dome. The footmen set the trays upon wooden stands, then joked with us, as they always did, before wishing us bon appetit. Footmen, bone china, it sounds posh. I suppose it was, but under those fancy domes was just kiddie stuff, fish fingers, cottage pies, roast chicken, green peas. He should have said like turkey twizzlers or something, because that's kiddie stuff. Roast chicken, cottage pies is not kiddie stuff. Oh, those Finder's crispy pancakes, that's kiddie stuff. So one thing that I noticed in the first few chapters of the book is that there's no sense of Diana as a person. She's just a concept, but there's just no detail about her where you can kind of see her as a person. There's nothing that you can learn from this that you don't already know from, again, the press's sainted version of her. And I think that was quite disappointing, really. I thought there would be at least some sense of how he felt about her personally, but there just isn't any. And I do find it quite ironic how he was more than happy to try and paint his father passive-aggressively in a bad light by bringing up allegations and rumours and things about what he'd just said or going off to see his girlfriend after he was born. There's a greater sense of who Charles is, and he's a lot more complex than Diana is, which I thought was quite interesting. Mabel, our nanny, who'd once been Pa's nanny, joined us. As we all stuffed our faces, we heard Pa padding past in his slippers, coming from his bath. He was carrying his wireless, which is what he called his portable CD player, on which he liked to listen to his storybooks while soaking. Pa was like clockwork, so when we heard him in the hall we knew it was close to 8. So even that, you get so much character from someone, from that small little detail of the fact that Charles calls a portable CD player a wireless, or that he listens to audiobooks in the bath, or that he has a very rigid routine that he sticks to, so Harry knows exactly what time it is based on what Charles is doing. Small details like that, you learn so much more about someone. And again, I was born in the 90s and I grew up around all these press stories, and I've literally learned nothing about Diana that I haven't just absorbed from just being around watching daytime TV or the news in the morning. I've learned nothing about her from Harry's book at all. Pa stopped by on his way to dinner. He was running late, but he made a show of lifting a silver dome. Yum, wish I was having that. And taking a long sniff. He was always sniffing things. Food, roses, our hair. He must have been a bloodhound in another life. Maybe he took all those long sniffs because it was hard to smell anything over his personal scent. So Harry makes some jibe about Charles's strong aftershave. But again, you're learning more about Charles and who he is as a man. So he notes as well that the divorce happened a year ago. Nothing to contrast with that to understand the differences. There was no comment or observation from before they were divorced. What were they like as people before that time? Just a bit of innuendo about Charles cheating. So I suppose I have to ask myself as a reader, does he not remember anything, or does he not have anything negative to deploy against other people? Willie and I finished dinner, watched some more TV, then got up to our typical pre-bedtime hijinks. We perched on the top step of a side staircase and eavesdropped on the adults, hoping to hear a naughty word or story. We ran up and down the long corridors, under the watchful eyes of dozens of dead stagheads. So this is another quote that I want to refer back to, but to point out, at this point William is 15 and Harry is 12, turning 13, showing that he and William had a very normal brotherly relationship. They would get up to mischief at bedtime and things like that. So going back to his observation that William had such a luxury half of a bedroom they shared, and his was so much less luxurious. Harry says, my bed was tall, I had to jump to get in, after which I rolled down into its sunken centre. It felt like climbing onto a bookcase, then tumbling into a slit trench. The bedding was clean, crisp, various shades of white. Everything was pulled tight as a snare drum, so expertly smooth that you could easily spot the century's worth of patched holes and tears. So even though his half of a room that they shared was so far less luxurious than William's, his bed was so big he had to jump to get into it. So he's surrounded by luxury. Yet all he can take from it is that if William's got something, it's obviously better than his. I pulled the sheets and covers to my chin because I didn't like the dark. No, not true. I loathed the dark. Mummy did too. She told me so. I'd inherited this from her, I thought, along with her nose, her blue eyes, her love of people, her hatred of smugness, fakery and all things posh. Just pointing out that Charles has blue eyes as well. Harry's claim of her hating smugness and fakery don't really stand up, do they? There's this video that I see on social media quite a lot, on like TikTok, and it's of her and Charles at some engagement, and she's wearing this massive hat and she's got her head down the whole time, and then she lifts her head up and all the photographers flash. I'll try and find it and link it, but I'm sure a lot of people have seen it. And she looks pretty smug in that. I think she knows very much that the press were there to see her. Just as Charles was writing something and doing something important, she decided to give the press what they wanted. She seems to enjoy being smug there. He hates all things posh, does he? Does Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex, hate all things posh, does he? Puts him some speculative questions. I can see myself under those covers, staring into the dark, listening to the clicky insects and hooty owls. Did I imagine shapes sliding along the walls? Did I stare at the bar of light along the floor, which was always there, because I always insisted on the door being left open a crack? How much time elapsed before I dropped off? In other words, how much of my childhood remained, and how much did I cherish it, savour it, before groggily becoming aware of? And then his father's at the end of the bed because he's going to tell him about his mother's accident. So I'm just going to go over a couple of lines in that particular bit. And things that are pointed out is the fact that Charles calls him darling boy a lot. That's his affectionate name for him. He sat down on the edge of the bed. He put his hand on my knee. Darling boy, Mummy's been in a car crash. I vividly remember that thought flashing through my mind. I remember waiting patiently for Pa to confirm that indeed Mummy was alright. And I remember him not doing that. Pa looked down into the folds of the old quilts and blankets and sheets. There were complications. Mummy was quite badly injured and taken to hospital, darling boy. He always called me darling boy, but he was saying it quite a lot now. His voice was soft. He was in shock, it seemed. So he is able to acknowledge that Charles was in shock, but the extent to which he's willing to empathise with him as a child from that point of view, or even as an adult recalling these events, especially as a father himself, like, it's extremely limited how much he can empathise with his father. Like, this is a conversation that no one prepares for. Like, what would you say? So again, he continues his speculative questions. Did he mention paparazzi? Did he say she'd been chased? I don't think so. I can't swear to it, but probably not. The packs were such a problem for Mummy, for everyone. It didn't need to be said. Charles says, they tried, darling boy. I'm afraid she didn't make it. Those phrases remain in my mind like darts in a board. He did say it in that way. I know that much for sure. She didn't make it. And then everything seemed to come to a stop. So he mentions that he didn't cry when he was told that his mother died. So again, as I've already mentioned, that Harry's quite passive aggressive and indirect, and he's obviously got a lot of unresolved feelings about his father that he hasn't really processed or confronted. It's quite evident from the way he writes about him, and especially at this moment when you would think that as an adult who is now a parent and has children, and just trying to imagine you trying to tell your children that their mother's passed away, the fact that he doesn't seem to have a lot of appreciation for the fact that there is no right or wrong way to do anything. He's very much judges his father and has decided that he's done something wrong. Pa didn't hug me. He wasn't great at showing emotions under normal circumstances. How could he be expected to show them in such a crisis? But his hand did fall once more on my knee, and he said, "It's going to be okay." That was quite a lot for him. Fatherly, hopeful, kind, and so very untrue. Very passive-aggressive sentence. That was quite a lot for him to do something fatherly, was it? Why is that? Why does Harry feel so dissatisfied with Charles as a parent? What evidence does he have to show that Charles just was inadequate? Charles is one of the exclusive set of people that Harry likes to use as scapegoats for when things go wrong. So again, going back to his earlier claim, he's not going to make verbatim claims. Charles isn't great at showing emotions. What does showing emotions mean to you personally? Because earlier he mentioned the fact that Charles was always sniffing their hair. Someone might interpret that as being affectionate. That's quite intimate as well. It's like a display of love, isn't it? To smell someone, to take in their scent, to really breathe them in. But this is just my opinion. What I think he means by saying that Charles isn't great at showing emotions is that Charles has never been vulnerable in front of him. He interprets the most obvious forms of communication, like verbalising things and verbalising your feelings, as that's the only way to do it. Like in his instance, because he didn't cry, that means now that he's like deeply emotionally repressed. Like, not everyone cries when they're sad. And it's quite narrow-minded to take that view that certain actions mean certain emotions, and that's all that they mean. And because you haven't done that, that means there's something wrong. Because some people don't cry when they're upset, some people cry when they're angry, and they might not look angry, but they are angry, they're just crying. But he is making verbatim claims about how people express their emotions, and he's decided that it's wrong. That was the first 3 chapters of Spare, and now I'm going to go over onto chapter 1 of Tina Brown's The Diana Chronicles, because I thought there was some very important information in there that would contextualise a lot of things, especially as we got nothing about Diana from Harry's book. She's just a concept, an idea. We know who she is, but he's not actually going to tell us anything about her. So again, because Harry's writing under the guise of being a reliable source of information, it's a first-hand account. These are just his feelings, and this is how he feels about them as an adult thinking back. So you have to think about the context of who's writing it and how he's writing it at that time, and what his motivations are as a writer writing that, looking back. So he's already tried to use this Diana Dodie conspiracy theory in his Apple documentary. He claimed that Diana and Dodie were chased to their deaths because he was a man of colour. And then he was also implying that he was being chased and hounded by the press because he was with someone who wasn't white. My mother was chased to her death while she was in a relationship with someone who wasn't white. And now look what's happening. You want to talk about history repeating itself? They're not going to stop until she dies. It's incredibly triggering to potentially lose another woman in my life. Like, the list is growing. And it all comes back to the same people, the same business model, the same industry. So that's what he said in that documentary. And unfortunately, because Harry has presented no dimension to his mother, and it also probably shows he just doesn't want to confront the fact that Diana was very well versed with how to use the press. The fact that he's saying that Diana and Dodie were in a relationship, and that's something that a lot of evidence that Tina Brown collected disputes. So we're just going to go through chapter 1 because it's quite long. So the first detail is that the British ambassador didn't even know she was in town, nor did the French authorities. So if Diana hadn't refused border protection and that kind of protocol, she would have had to inform, you know, the embassy that she was somewhere and local law enforcement would know. But they didn't know that she was in Paris. And Brown points out the odd choice to take her to the Ritz in the first place. Dodie had use of a lavish apartment in a building belonging to his father, so what need did they have of a hotel suite? They were at the Ritz that night only because Dodie was intent on showing off his father's wealth, dispatching hotel flunkies on yet more shopping expeditions. No one pursued by paparazzi would otherwise choose this venue as a hideout. Paris's most prestigious hotel at the time of year is crawling with camera-toting tourists and rubberneckers. Again, context. Why would they be out in a public place that's going to have a lot of people? And she's one of the most famous women in the world, the most photographed woman in the world at that point in time. Why would they be somewhere so public if they didn't want to be seen? So Diana's fame made her quite an inconvenient guest. The moneyed social players of her newer London circle didn't rush to ask her to stay in August either. Who could face the palaver? There was the aftermath of having the tabloids scavenge through your garbage for newsworthy evidence. Only Dodi's father, Mohammed Al-Fayed, was keen enough and rich enough to take on that aggravation. And that's a very important thing we need to look at. The motivations why someone would want to be around someone like Diana, who was the most famous woman in the world. She was also divorced, and her personal life was a hot topic at this point. It was more so than anything professional that she did. So Brown makes parallels between Diana's honeymoon in 1981 and the last couple of weeks of her life. Instead of the Royal Yacht Britannia with its Royal Marine bands and crew of 222, it was Mohammed Al-Fayed's feverishly refurbished Chronicle, acquired for $12 million 1 month before to impress her. Instead of the disciplined floating privacy of a closely guarded royal destination, it was a pestered cruise of the Mediterranean's highest profile resorts in a shark pond of paparazzi. Their telephoto lenses were trained on the Chronicles windows as the vacationing couple ate and slept. So in my previous video Harry mentioned how allegedly, again because he doesn't ask anyone anything and he doesn't know anything about his own life, allegedly Prince Philip is the one who encouraged Charles to pursue Diana in the first place. And Tina Brown notes that the heir to Harrods, like the Prince of Wales, pursued Diana primarily because his father encouraged him to. Even the two bodyguards on the trip, Trevor Rhys-Jones and Alexander Kes Wingfield, reported not to Dodi but to his dad. If Dodi did something that was contravening what his father wanted, I had to report it to his father, Rhys-Jones said. So Harry described Dodi Al-Fayed as a nice enough bloke, and that's fair enough if that's what he felt as a child, but again, he's a grown man now and he has the ability to find more information about people. If he actually presented any opinion that he could gain from learning more about this man who he's decided was in a relationship with his mother, even though he was just someone who was entertaining her at the time. Were they in a relationship? It's quite heavily disputed. Dodi had been all to set and marry a Calvin Klein model named Kelly Fisher on the 9th of August 1997, until on Bastille Day, 14th of July, his father summoned him from Paris to join the first holiday with the princess and made wooing her an urgent imperative. The baffled Fisher was kept out of sight in Saint-Tropez on Al-Fayed's Belis boat, a former US Coast Guard cutter. Dodi visited her at night in secret until she wised up to the subterfuge and tried to sue for breach of contract. The same month, the princess's lover of 2 years, the Pakistani heart surgeon Hasnat Khan, dashed her hopes by making it clear he didn't want to go public. And I find that to be the most interesting thing, because I obviously know that she had a relationship with a heart surgeon who was Pakistani. I know that because of later on, obviously when we get to that point in Spare, but you know, that's probably one of my earliest opinions I ever gained of both William and Harry actually, was when he used that racial slur against one of the army cadet officers, the P word. His mom literally dated someone from Pakistan. So Harry makes no mention of Hasnat Khan at all in his book, so did he not know him? He isn't white. You'd think he would definitely use that. The problem for Diana now was that her new court could preserve her ego but not her person. Because she stubbornly refused to retain the Royal Security Detail, seeing them as spies for the enemy camp, she was doomed to seek protection from the paranoid rich. From the day she was divorced, said her driver, the former Royal Protection Officer Colin Tebbert, we lost the official car. That was the worst day's work the government ever did. So again, it's good to see kind of what kind of point in her life she was at, what she required, what her needs were, and why things were so difficult for her in the first place. And it was because of her celebrity status, and it thwarted any chance of having a relationship with a normal person. Hewitt used to whisk her off to Devon, where she'd help his mother do the dishes in the snug cottage. Khan, hid under a blanket in Paul Burrell's car, oh Paul, would arrive at Kensington Palace with Kentucky Fried Chicken for dinner. When he took her on a date, she wore a black wig and glasses and thrilled to the excitement of standing undetected in a line at Ronnie Scott's jazz club. She called her healing therapist, Simone Simons, from outside the club once and said how much she loved standing in the queue, admitting she'd never had to wait in line for anything before. So Diana couldn't have a normal life. It was unworkable at that point, and she only experienced these fleeting moments of everyday, mundane tasks. Diana saw this as the cosy index of her future life with Khan, but as Khan himself recognised, it was a Marie Antoinette stuff, a daydream that would have exploded when it collided with reality. In the multimedia age, downsizing was unfeasible. Besides, she would have died with boredom. And that's something that I feel a lot of hardcore Dianaists just don't want to admit, is that she liked the attention, she liked playing the media game. She was very good at it, she knew what she was doing. And I suppose you could call it power really, couldn't you? The ability to get that much media attention, to get all those cameras focused on you. It is power. It's a power play. And would you willingly give up your power? So then we get on to another one of Diana's friends, who is Gulu Lalvani. And Tina Brown notes that it was Lalvani's appearance in her life in January that caused Diana's last breach in the spring in 1997 with her mother, who exploded on the phone about her daughter's relationship with Muslim men. Lalvani was actually a Punjabi Sikh, but as far as Mrs. Chand Kidd was concerned, he was still unacceptably brown. In June, Diana took Lalvani dancing at Annabelle's, the Berkeley Square nightclub, in the hopes of making Hasnat jealous. She did not understand that it was just this kind of exposure that her medical heartthrob most read and dreaded. If she had understood that, it might have been the man she really loved on a sun deck with her, not his Erzat's replacement. So there is a picture of Diana and Lalvani, and she's in the front seat of the car, and she's not visibly upset. She seems to be very much wanting to be photographed. She wants to be seen. There's a reason you're seeing her at that point. There's a reason there is no real photographic evidence of her and Hasnat Khan, or her and James Hewitt cozied up together, because as much as she was pursued by the press, she could, if she wanted to, not be seen. So those pictures of her with Lalvani, they give you a much more complex understanding of who she was, and the fact that she knew a lot of the time how to use the press. I mean, obviously in this instance it probably wasn't for her own benefit, and that's a hard lesson that you'd have had to learn. Like, I suppose the modern equivalent would be like people posting stuff on social media, but I suppose newspapers were Diana's Instagram account, weren't they really? I also found the comment about her mother being critical of her having or being linked to people who weren't white very interesting, because Diana had a family. The Spencers and her side of the family just always seemed to escape any scrutiny when it comes to why she was unhappy with her life. She had 3 siblings, you know, obviously her father died, but her mother was still alive, well, during this time as well. And the fact that she had no support, or felt that she didn't have any support, or she was unhappy with her life, seems to just fall on the royal family a lot. And no one seems to ask the question of what exactly were her family doing? Where were they? Especially as one of her sisters lived at Kensington Palace, and her husband was the Queen's private secretary. I think he was assistant private secretary when she first married. And this is a very contentious issue as well. Tina Brown's basically saying that Diana's mother was a little bit prejudiced to non-white people. That just goes completely without any comment from anyone. Why? So Dodi was giving her a lot of presents, obviously, because he was trying to impress her. In the course of Dodi's 6-week relationship with Diana, that really does contextualise it, doesn't it really? 6 weeks. He showered her with a multi-stranded seed pearl bracelet fastened with jewel-encrusted dragon's head, and more importantly, and a gold dressing ring with a diamond that was on her finger at the time of the accident. Now that's something that has led a lot of conspiracy theorists to decide that the relationship was far more serious than a little 6-week fling, and that they were engaged. And then I know there was more conspiracy theories saying that, oh, she must have been pregnant. Again, that's all just conspiracy theorists. So we get more of an account of Dodi's character and what kind of person he was. So one of his bodyguards notes that he'd be sitting in a traffic jam in the middle of rush hour, Reith Jones said, and it would be, why haven't you gone this way? He hated sitting in traffic, always wanted to push through, jump lanes, try to get somewhere more quickly. He'd ordered me to speed up when I knew the speed camera was coming. And Reith Jones again mentions about the Saint-Tropez holiday. He says, Reith Jones had been touched at how carefree and warm she was, wandering around in a fun fair and going on rides with her kids until the press ruined it for them. She was lovely, he reflected, and her children were fantastic. She could do miles better than this guy, for Christ's sake. Obviously, Reith Jones worked for the Fayed family, so they obviously perhaps didn't always treat him politely. So this bit's obviously, there's no named source here, but Tina Brown writes that Prince William shared Reith Jones's view. He felt mounting dismay at his mother's relationship with Dodi and was uncomfortable with the Al Fayed's display of copious consumption. He told friends that he had felt that he was being tested on the July vacation. Suddenly a group of people he barely knew were acting like a sort of substitute family. Dodi, like a lot of wealthy people, had access to a lot of things, and he liked to dust the old nostrils. Pictures of her frolicking aboard the Chronicle in August led to a blow-up on the phone with his mother. This is talking about Prince William. The 15-year-old prince was dreading the commentary from schoolmates when he returned to Eton for the autumn term. It's doubtful whether Dodi could have withstood William's disapproval, nor would Diana herself have withstood any indication of Dodi's renewed drug abuse, which she abhorred. So it's interesting how Harry earlier said that he and William were just happy that their mother was happy, but it seems that William wasn't approving. He was just very guarded and not immediately trusting someone who's given him a new toy and let him ride on their jet skis. So Tina Brown talks about possible career moves for Diana now that she's no longer royal, and Tony Blair's plans to use her as an ambassador for Britain. Blair told me that he had Diana in mind to boost the African initiative on overseas aid and debt cancellations that became the Millennium Campaign. He and Sherry had invited Diana and William to lunch at Chequers, and they had played football on the lawn. Only months before the Chronicle left on its pleasure cruise, Diana had undertaken the most courageous mission of her life to campaign against anti-personal mines. And we also get a first-hand account of a reporter seeing Diana on the job. In January, the Sunday Times reporter Christina Lamb was exposed to her up close visiting landmine victims in Angola, and was struck by how she never turned her head away from injuries so gruesome she herself could not look at them despite the years of third world reporting. She had something I'd only ever seen before from Nelson Mandela, Lamb wrote, a kind of aura that made people want to be with her and completely natural, straight from the heart, a sense of how to bring hope to those who seem to have little to live for. There is a sense of like she never really got going, she never really got any momentum going on her new life. It just was cut short tragically so quickly. I think there's a lot of important context now when we're talking about why she was making friends with some very rich people. Mohammed Al Fayed was a billionaire, and as much as social media at the moment is very much applauding, you know, Rihanna and Taylor Swift, Kylie Jenner, you know, these billionaires, slay queen, there's no such thing as an ethical billionaire. If you've acquired that much wealth, it is at the exploitation of other people. There's no way around that. There's no such thing as an ethical billionaire. And Mohammed Al Fayed was a ruthless businessman. You don't have that much success because you're a nice guy, you're a nice person, you're a charitable person. That's not how it works. And like a lot of rich people, he likes to acquire status symbols. That's why he bought a whole yacht a few weeks before to impress Diana, to parade her around on. And what better status symbol would there be than Diana, Princess of Wales? So Brown notes that in October 1994, Al Fayed exposed a news bomb under John Major's Tory government with what became known as the Cash for Questions scandal. He brazenly revealed that in his takeover battle for Harrods in 1985, he had paid members of Parliament, including Neil Hamilton, Junior Minister at the Department of Trade and Industry, to ask questions in Parliament on his behalf. Lobbyist Ian Gear, who was hired by Al Fayed to plant questions, allegedly told Al Fayed, "You rent a taxi, a London taxi, you rent an MP." Al Fayed used the left-leaning Guardian newspaper to fanfare his allegations of corruption, well timed to follow Major's pledge in the House of Commons that he would root out corruption. Al Fayed's motives was revenge. He felt the Conservative government had betrayed him when it ordered the Department of Trade and Industry to investigate the financial underpinnings for his purchase of Harrods. The fact that 3 years later he still held out hope for redemptive royal connections would be touching if he had not pursued his social aspirations with such transparent manipulation. The Department of Trade and Industry inquiry revealed that he had lied about his assets, his background, and even the date of his birth. So this is a powerful man with a lot of resources. He was able to use the press for his own personal business agendas. You know, he's not afraid of politicians. He can buy politicians. A man with this much wealth was using national newspapers to interfere with politics. So does this sound like someone who's being duped or is powerless? You know, he has the resources, the wealth, and the power to make these moves. And I think it's important to remember as well that Diana wasn't stupid. She obviously knew when people were trying to court the Princess of Wales and not the woman who she was. And she told her friend Rosa, "He's given me a bracelet, he's given me a watch. I know the next thing will be a ring." Then she laughed and said, "Rosa, that's going firmly on the fourth finger on my right hand." An evasion of commitment Burrell endorses with his own version in his book, The Way We Were. As much as Paul Burrell is a bit annoying to see on TV, he did know her and he was privy to a lot of this information. On the topic of the ring that she was wearing when she got into the accident and conspiracies about it being an engagement ring, Tina Brown offers a very logical and reasonable argument against that conspiracy theory. It's unlikely too that Mohammed Al Fayed, who was paying, and Mr. Raposi, who was the jeweller at the Ritz, between them would have let Dodi propose to the princess with an $11,000 ring purchased in such an ad hoc fashion. A Diana engagement ring to be photographed by every media outlet in the world would surely have been a more extravagant item, featuring a diamond as big as the Ritz. And for context, at her Tearful press conference on the 14th of August 1997 in Los Angeles, Kelly Fisher displayed a sapphire and diamond engagement ring from Dodi valued at £118,000. Was the princess worth less than Dodie's dumped fiancé? We're talking about very rich, wealthy people and their status symbols. That's a very good point. Would they use just a cheapo ring that they just purchased? Then there is the question of the all-important one-upmanship with the Windsors. Even the famously thrifty Queen Elizabeth II had forked out more than £28,000 to the royal jeweller Garrard for the sapphire and diamond ring Charles gave Diana on their engagement. Does anyone think Al-Fayed would have allowed himself to be outshone in a retail matter? Besides, Mr. Raposi himself, in the first interview he gave to TV producer Martin Gregory, said the ring he sold Dodie that night was not an engagement ring. Only later did he change his story to insist that it was, and it must be remembered that clients of the Ritz Hotel were some of Raposi's best customers. So there's inconsistencies with the ring, which feeds into general conspiracy theorists. The fact that the ring in the Harrods display case does not match Raposi's description of what he said Dodie bought for Diana is just one more of the mysteries in Mohammed Al-Fayed's obfuscating world of commerce and make-believe. Tina Brown notes that Diana was very well versed with the press and paparazzi. As much as it could be distressing, she knew what to do, she knew how to react and things like that. But Dodie wasn't used to this. He might be rich and have security, but he wasn't used to this much attention. No traces of cocaine were found in the blood test conducted on Dodie or Diana by the pathologist at the 1997 post-mortem in London. Dodie's agitation and erratic instruction that night were simply that of a man hopelessly out of his depth, panicked by the burden of becoming the world's most high-profile Romeo. Thierry Rocher, the Ritz's night manager, told the French police he was at the end of his tether, and in my opinion this could have changed Mr. Paul's behaviour whilst he was at the wheel. In chapter 1 there's also a large poll about, it does the timeline of what happened the night of the crash. I'm not going to go over that now, but I'm just going to point out Brown's earlier comments on the fact that no one could really accommodate Diana's needs. We've already seen from her appearance with Gulu Lalvani that she knew how to use a press and she knew how to stage herself when she wanted to and also remain safe. She didn't have a royal protection as she had previously, but it's not just that, it's about the motives of the people who were courting her, who were trying to accommodate her, who were trying to seduce her into their circle. Being rich and famous and being Diana level famous were not the same and are not comparable, very difficult to get used to as well. So Dodie was a novice at the media game, but Diana was the most artful practitioner alive. She was way ahead of her contemporaries in foreseeing a world where celebrity was, so to speak, the coin of the realm. Her life's obsession was how to control the genius she had released. All through the holidays she'd been doing dangerous dances with the press. When she learnt about Charles's birthday party for Camilla at Highgrove, she said to Lady Bowker, "Elsa, you know what I thought the other day? What a wonderful idea if I were to put on my bathing suit and hide under the birthday cake and suddenly just jump out." She more or less did. The snap of her long legs and arched body in the pale blue one-piece about to execute an elegant dive from the Chronicle had gladdened the hearts of newspaper editors all over the world. So Diana had a very good relationship with the tabloid press. This is something that she built up over the years, especially with certain favoured editors. But this is something that is just not broached at all in Harry's narrative of his mother. You know, never seen her on the phone talking to any of her good old friends who happened to be editors of national newspapers. On her last night in Paris, she reached Richard Kay, her confidant at the Daily Mail, on his mobile phone shopping in Knightsbridge to find out what was going on in the press, and said how much she dreaded the Sunday papers coming out. It did not occur to her to ignore them. And this was probably the most important thing that I took from Tina Brown's book. Tina Brown obviously mentions that Diana isn't stupid, she knows what she's doing. She was a smart woman. So obviously she understood what the Fayeds were doing when they were trying to dazzle her and impress her and bring her into their circle. But what she underestimated was Mohammed Al-Fayed's own appetite for the spotlight. All through the holiday it puzzled Diana that the press had always knew their whereabouts. She suspected Al-Fayed was leaking information. She told Kay, and indeed he was. Al-Fayed had hired a publicist, Max Clifford, to brief gossip columnists and tout the holiday fling as the romance of the century. So again, this is some information that is just not really circulated, especially in a time of short form content on, you know, TikTok and Reels and things like that, when we're talking about stuff about Diana, which leads conspiracy theorists to regurgitate the same stuff over and over again. Harry's not directly contributing to that, but the fact that there's, again, nothing about Diana that you wouldn't know from just the press version of her that exists, it's quite, I would not say disappointing, but I was actually quite shocked how little there was about her in this whole book. So again, it's important to be mindful this is just how he feels, and a lot of it you have to take as what he feels at the time of writing this, as opposed to how he actually felt at the time. There's a whole other debate about memory and things like that I'm sure a lot of psychologists would be able to get into. What was revealing is that Harry doesn't really know anything about his mother's personal life. Diana had a lot of friends, especially friends in the press, and there's just nothing about that in his book or any perception of how that impacted the time they spent together. Obviously she had a very good work-life balance if he's completely oblivious and ignorant to the fact that she was probably one of the most, as Tina Brown calls her, one of the most well-versed practitioners of press manipulation that there is at the time. But the complete absence of Hasnat Khan, even as one of Diana's friends, is just very interesting. But I do think it's good that Diana and Charles, because Charles did as well, they didn't introduce, you know, their romantic partners to their children until it was a serious commitment. So I think they both deserve credit where credit's due on that point. Again, I'm going to stop it there. That's a very long video. I'm not going to go through every single chapter in Spare because some of them are really just so like boring and they're just info dumps, especially when it's about his army training. That, yeah, they're just not very interesting. So I won't go through every single chapter because a lot of them aren't really that interesting, but I will pick out some bits and bobs here and there. So if you made it this far, well done. That was a long one. I will see you in the next video. Bye.